Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. As I'm recording, we are just one day out from the release of the completed report commissioned by Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, looking into accusations of dishonorable behavior by Ravi Zacharias. This final report came out here in mid-February. At the end of December, we got an interim report that acknowledged that many of the already known accusations were actually accurate, and that there would be more things coming and being revealed. So in one sense, there's nothing particularly new or surprising or shocking in this final report, but it is a reminder of the grim truth of what we probably already knew. And so a lot of folks, me included, are just kind of reeling from this revelation. Now, I want to be upfront and honest and say this. I have been a fan of Ravi Zacharias for more than 30 years and found these accusations very disturbing. However, I did not find them shocking. Here's why. Not because I had any insight into Ravi, but because I do have insight into people. I've been thinking about this, that I and many of you have been waiting for this report, and I've been wondering why. Why are we waiting for this? That led me to think, you know what, before I worry about me and how this makes me feel, or before I worry about Ravi's family or things like that, maybe I need to worry about these victims. But then I thought, why these victims? It is, in some sense, a surprise that Ravi would do these heinous things. But it's not in another sense. Because that's what we are. This is not something unusual. If you were to go, and I'm not suggesting that what he did is exactly the same thing, but I venture to guess that if someone were to do a deep dive in your electronic forms, whether your computer or your phone or whatnot, they would find things deeply troubling. And if they were to look into it, they would find also people who were harmed by you. But nobody's waiting for the report on you. When that report comes out, it's not going to go on the internet and trend. Now, friends, I'm not trying to justify anything. It's reprehensible. But there's something more than simply, we need to remember that Jesus is our only hero and that all our earthly heroes have feet of clay. That's true. Absolutely true. But there's more to it than that. There is a very real sense in which all of us are rubber-necked ghouls. What's a rubber-necked ghoul, you ask? A rubber-necked ghoul is that person, the reason why when you're traveling down the interstate and traffic comes to a virtual stop and you look ahead and you can't really see anything up ahead, but eventually you slowly make your way forward and you come across an accident that happened long ago. They're cleaning the space up. The ambulance is ready to leave. The wrecked car has been pushed off to the side of the road. So why isn't traffic sped up? Well, because of rubber-necked ghouls. We stop, we slow down, and we look, wondering if we're going to see carnage. Now, we're all rubber-necked ghouls, aren't we? When we see a spiritual pile-up, a Christian celebrity train wreck, we tune in. And we tisk-tisk. Have you ever wondered this? Is it possible that the reason we're interested in the grievous sins and moral failings of celebrity Christians is because it distracts us from our own? Isn't it possible that even though he's actually guilty, and even though he has actual victims, that we have, in a manner of speaking, chosen Ravi or Carl Lentz or James McDonald as our scapegoat? They get sent out from the camp. They get canceled. They become the pariah. And my sins and my secrets are not interesting to anyone else. And so I don't have to worry about them being made public. It's what we do. You know, there will be, over the next several days, more and more people just, again, chastening all of us for putting Ravi up on a pedestal. And again, I agree. We have and we shouldn't. But we're also the ones that rejoice when he gets knocked down. We're the ones who find that interesting. We're the ones who slow down and peek and hope to see a little bit of the carnage. If someone with all the gifts and talents that Ravi Zacharias had could do the things that he's done, then I must not be so bad. You know, my father used to do this experiment in teaching ethics at the seminary. He would invite the students, give me a list of the most evil men in history. And he would write down the names on the chalkboard, and someone would say Hitler, and someone would say Stalin, and someone would say Nero, and someone would say Idi Amin or Pol Pot or Saddam Hussein. Take your tin-horn dictator of choice. And he'd write this list, and he'd say, what do these guys all have in common? And they would realize, oh, they're all political leaders. And my dad would say they weren't just political leaders. They were political leaders whose political power was such that they could not be challenged. Now, you may think that the only way to get into that position is by being the kind of person that would do the evil things that they did. That's one way to look at it. Or you might look at it this way. Anybody who had that much power might very well do the very wicked things that they did. That the giving of that power to those men removed the restraints that restrain you and me. We're hearing stories that Ravi, in grooming his victims, did two things. One, told his victims that they were his reward for his faithful ministry. And then two, when they didn't like it anymore, when they didn't want to stay in that hardship, he warned them that if they went public, millions would lose their faith. Now, that may be the most shocking thing of the whole thing to me. That anyone would think that anyone would lose their faith over the sin of anyone other than Jesus. So, friends, by all means, pray for the family. It's very easy to see them as complicit, and we don't know if or how much they were, and a judgment of charity would slow us down from jumping to any conclusions. Pray for the family. Of course, pray for the victims. But while you're praying for the victims, pray for all the victims that have been abused in the same way by people we never heard of. And then pray that you would have the same compassion on them, and that your moral outrage wouldn't be grounded in the exalted position of the sinner, but rather in the sinfulness of the sin. We come now in our ongoing series, The Bible in 5 Minutes, to the book of Daniel. Daniel is considered the last of the major prophets, and we will have minor prophets coming soon. We do need to remember that these distinctions are not in any way intended to diminish the authority of the other prophets or even their significance. Now, the book of Daniel, one could argue, can be divided into two parts. In the first part, we have more historical narrative, and the second half more prophecy. The historical narrative describes the work and ministry of Daniel in the context of the exile of Judah. In Isaiah, in Jeremiah, we had the prediction that this exile was going to happen. We will have later prophets looking back after the exile. Joseph is the only major prophet that actually is prophesying during the exile. And his message, whether it be that message that comes out of the more narrative parts or the message that comes out of the more prophetic parts, remains the same. What we see is Daniel giving a message, again, original audience, to people in a context of being overrun, being under the thumb of an unbelieving and foreign power. The message is God is in control. God is in control. You need to not be afraid. You need to not succumb to the temptation to become like your neighbors. But you also need to not be afraid. You need, in a manner of speaking, to pray for the peace of Babylon. We see in the life of Joseph, along with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, sort of two forces at work that one could argue are at odds with each other. On the one hand, we see them rising into positions of power and authority in this foreign empire. On the other hand, we see them falling into disfavor with those who are in power precisely because of their faithfulness. We have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego who will be thrown into the fiery furnace. We have Daniel who's going to be thrown into the lion's den. And in both cases, we have the very king who sent them into these places of death rejoicing in God's deliverance. Now, there's something else that I think we overlook in the book of Daniel that's very, very important. Many of the prophecies that we see in Daniel could be argued, and often are argued, to be yet very far in our future. But some of them are not. When he interprets the king's dream, the first dream of the giant statue, Daniel does something astonishing. Well, actually, God does something astonishing, revealing to Daniel not just, hey, this is going to happen in the next 6 months, not something so far and so distant that we wouldn't know anything about it yet, but rather he describes the rise and fall of a succession of empires that we actually witness in history. Daniel says that you're the gold part, you're the Babylonians, and you're going to be overthrown by the silver part. That's going to be the Medes and the Persians. And then's going to come the bronze part. That's the Greeks. And then's going to come the iron part. That's the Romans. And that's going to be broken up. The whole monster is going to be broken by the stone uncut by human hands. The fifth empire is the kingdom of God itself. That's quite a prediction. And I would argue it carries a great deal of apologetic weight. We have a prophecy that looks forward hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years into the future, which prophecy we can look into our past and see that it was fulfilled. Well, all of that is built on that earlier premise that we mentioned, that God is on his throne. We are to be confident about that. And again, be faithful when our service to the King leads us into places of power and influence, and to remain faithful even when those can be lost because we're trying to be faithful. That's a wonderful part of the story. There are two things that I want to mention quickly because they're two of my favorite things in the whole Bible, each of them related to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The first one is this. I love their response to the threat of death. Because they will not bow down to the statue of the king, they're told they're going to get thrown in the fiery furnace, and their response is not, oh, there's nothing you can do, king, because God's going to rescue us. They don't know that. They're not sure of that at all. What they say is, throw us in. God may rescue us. God may not rescue us. Either way, yeah, we're not changing our mind. I just love that that spirit. And then, of course, the other thing is the appearance of the fourth man in the fire. Friends, we have, as I have emphasized the last few weeks on this podcast, we are entering into a dark season where the Christian faith is rapidly losing any sense of influence, and we are becoming persona non grata in our own culture. We're going into exile in our own homeland. We have much to learn from Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. May God make us faithful. And may we trust in Him, His promises, and His power. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com and join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.